Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. So thanks for everybody for joining us today. We're just up to 11 o'clock, so we're just going to give people a few more minutes to join before we get started with our discussion. We have our panelists here waiting, and as people are trickling in, I can see that most people attending are, in tech, startup scale ups, a few folks in media, professional services. But if you're dialing in from and you work in a different industry, just pop your industry into the chat, because obviously we'd love to make this conversation as actionable as possible for you today. And obviously, kind of the advice that and the conversation that we'll have will depend on the people who are joining us. The other thing is it'd be useful to understand your role as well. So if you are, just pop into the chat if you're, an HR generalist or in people operations, reward benefits, or other as well. So that would be useful to know, as it'll allow us to baseline the conversation a bit. So that's awesome. And I see some people already putting into the chat. So thanks for that. Uh, Finally, I guess before we get going, if you have questions throughout the webinar, again, just pop them into the chat, as we'll have time for Q&A towards the end. And if you hear me talking to Jimmy, I'm not crazy. Jimmy is our producer in the background. He's coordinating everything behind the scenes, making sure that things go smoothly. So he'll be popping in and asking a couple questions and things like that there as well. So that's really helpful. So with that said, we're about kind of into the hour here. So why don't we go ahead and get kick started? Today we will obviously be discussing how companies are thinking about navigating compensation during a downturn. It's a really interesting topic and one that I'm super excited to chat through with our panelists today. So before we do that, I wanted to make sure that I got to introduce myself as well. So maybe Jimmy, if you go to the next slide. For those of you who don't know me, I'm your host today. I'm David. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Ben. And why I thought this was an interesting topic to go through is because I'm constantly having discussions and conversations with reward leaders today who are basically asking me, hey, how do I deal with this, right? What do I do with my budget? How do I navigate things when they're not as rosy as they were in the previous couple of years? So that's why we thought this would be an interesting conversation. And I guess for those of you who don't know Ben as well, before we get started, we are the all-in-one flexible benefits platform for global teams. And our mission, as it says here, is to make benefits and pay work for everybody everywhere. And that's whether it's things like health insurance or the core kind of regulated benefits, to fully flex benefits budgets like a health and well-being budget or a learning and development budget. We're able to enable companies to streamline the management of any existing benefits and add new ones in as well. So with that quick introduction into Ben, I did want to just go through today's agenda. So we'll start with just a quick introduction to our panelists. We'll go into the bulk of the conversation, which will be a discussion on a number of topics, just so everybody knows. Kind of, we'll touch on how companies are planning to deal with inflation. What are other things, maybe non-monetary things that companies are doing to make a difference, and we'll also have a bunch of time for Q&A, right? So again, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat as we go along. So don't feel like you have to hold that through to the end. And then Jimmy, again, our producer in the background, will be collecting these behind the scenes to make sure that we get to them. So with that, our panel here has been waiting patiently behind the scenes. So I did want to give people a chance to introduce themselves before we get going into the discussion. So maybe we can kick off with Paul for a quick introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. And it's good to be here. It's good to have fellow panelists here as well. I'm happy to be a part of this and looking forward to the next hour. My name is Paul Enriquez. I am the head of Total Rewards at Molly. It's an international payments company based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I guess I qualify on this panel with close to 20 years experience in international total rewards. So I've been at this for a while, seen quite a few ups and downs, and looking forward to providing some tips in the next hour. So I'll hand that off to, I'll hand it off to Figen.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Vegan. As Paul mentioned, I've been around in Total Reward for quite a while. I think it's been a few years that I've been saying 15. I've stopped that. But it's probably nearing 20, as Paul, mainly in international global roles. I've started my career in-house, slowly built it all up until I decided to test the waters on the other side of the contracting and freelancing. And that's what I've been doing in the last 5 years. So working with multiple clients in all various industries, some form of tech, always somewhere. So I tend to look at things in a multifaceted way. Incredibly excited to be here today. And as Paul said, really share some tips. And if I can help 5 of you, I'll be more than happy to walk away knowing that. But as I said, sharing the experience and things that I'm seeing with my clients currently. Over to Bruce.
Thanks, Vegan. Hi, everyone. I'm Bruce Guest, the head of reward at Funding Circle. We're a fintech who specifically focus on small business loans. Opposite to Vegan, before I was in-house, I was a consultant and climbed the ladder there before moving in-house because I wanted to do a bit more of the implementation and less of just coming up with ideas and never seeing them through. My particular interests are in how reward can drive business strategy and also how we can evolve rewards to give individuals more value for the same cost. So I think that kind of covers what we're about to talk about
Yeah,
today.
that's a great tee up, Bruce. So thanks for that. I guess yeah, with that, we're going to cover a lot of different topics around again how you guys are navigating this time, as well as how you're seeing other rewards professionals think about compensation during what's a potential downturn, right? So I guess maybe we can get started with just some of the challenges that you see today, right? So it's obviously been a pretty interesting couple of years, but and things are always evolving and changing. But maybe, yeah, what are some of the things that you see going on in the market today? And maybe thinking you can kind of start with giving a perspective there, since you're working with multiple clients.
Yes, for sure. I mean, recruitment, it's continues to be the hot topic, trying to find the right talent for the right role. So it takes longer, and it's much more difficult. And the candidates that recruiters are talking, they're talking to 5 or 6 other organizations, and by the time you get the offer on the table, the candidate's already gone. So I'm sure it's a theme that everybody has heard of or is experiencing currently. So hiring continues to be an issue and a hot topic, but at the same time, hiring and the great resignation is still here, although the great resignation is now turning slowly into quiet quitting as well, which is the latest theme we're hearing and seeing quite a lot. So my clients are still grappling with both. Really a huge issue. Overlay that with the current economic situation that they're facing, and it's really becoming challenging. And really, how can you stretch that pound? How can you stretch that dollar? How can you stretch that euro? So what I'm seeing with my clients at the moment is kind of scrambling around: is our job framework right? Do we pay people right? If we do pay people right, then how is our benefit proposition? Are we keeping up with times? What can we do for our employees to provide better benefits? And especially, as I said, very topical with today, in the view of the economic environment, what else is there that we can do, to recruit, to attract people, but also to retain our the best talent? Because all my clients are bleeding talent, and I'm thinking, where are they going? Because everybody's kind of going to other organizations. It's quite difficult to recruit. So it's very, very interesting environment at the moment. Ever so challenging for reward professionals, and putting us really in a spot to be more and more creative with everything that we bring, all the knowledge and experience that we bring to these organizations. So that's my take, and that's what I see through various clients that I'm working with.
Yeah, Bruce, Paul, any perspective on that as well?
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. I think one of the all of those things that Fegan said, completely agree. And two words she said really chime with me. What else? Now, individuals who are looking to join a new company, they kind of get the salary package they want, and then they also ask, what else are you doing? And that comes to kind of benefits and policies. So we are seeing at Funding Circle people asking, do you pay the real living wage, which is enough to allow people to have cost of living? And people are asking that who wouldn't even be affected by that wage. So they're looking at more, and I think that's an impact of the pandemic, was rather than companies kind of giving you a wage and benefits, then they're now expected to support you in your life a lot more. And I think that's a huge challenge, but also an opportunity in the companies that are able to support their employees more, and not just on all aspects of the employee value proposition, will probably win in this war for talent. And right now it does feel like a war for talent. And then the other big challenge is planning. So at
Mm.
Funding Circle, we did a above inflationary increase back in March 21. That increase is now below inflation. So even though we thought this is going to keep us ahead of the pack, it's now fallen behind. And I think that might happen for the next year coming. So it's very hard to
Yeah.
budget. It's very hard to plan, and I'm sure we'll come on to that a bit more in the rest of it.
Yeah, I guess before we go into the inflation topic as well, maybe Paul, with your perspective, right? So, like, one of the things that I am talking to folks about is, the war for talent. Yes, it's still around the rear, isn't it? But is that going to subside given some what's potentially an economic downturn that's coming through, right? Like, I guess, like, is the war for talent over, right? Are we seeing a shift from what was previously a very, at least in the last 2 years, employee-driven, candidate-driven market to a more company-driven market? What do you guys think?
I'll take that one, David. I think from my perspective, the short answer to that is no, and mostly because there's still a lot of vacancies out there in these organizations that HR people departments are looking to fill. I think what's more likely to happen in the coming months to year, let's say, is this continuing of sort of like scrambling and stretching, right?
Mm.
And so it's scrambling to see what is going on in the market, trying to be on top of it, trying to gauge what is going on with talent, for example, what's going on internally with budget setting, and trying to balance, like trying to spin all these dishes on the sticks, if you will, and trying to keep everything sort of in check, I would say. So that's and then really trying to understand how we can stretch our budgets internally to keep up with bringing people into into organizations, and stretching to see how far we can get those dollars or those euros across different programs internally to make employees satisfied. I mean, to Bruce's point, what I'm hearing a lot of is like, what else, right? So as soon as you get people walking in through the door, it's one thing to have these these pay packages that employees are willing to sort of sign up for, but once they're there, there really is an expectation to do more as an employer for employees.
Mhm. Yeah, so and I guess we'll talk about that in a second in terms of what do we see as that being potential. I did want to circle back into the topic of inflation because I do think this is something that is in everybody's mind, right? Is like, how do you deal with that? So obviously inflation is at what is a 40-year high. It's never been this high, at least, especially for a lot of people who've been working like in folks' lifetime. So how do you guys think companies? I mean, should companies respond in the first place? How do you think companies will respond?
Shall I take that one?
Yeah.
I'll start the conversation on this one. I think it's really tough. It's the way I see the situation is it's between the devil and the deep blue sea, really. What do you do in the sense that you don't become part of the problem of the higher inflation, and that you do not pass the cost of your increases internally to your employees and the cost of, your payroll costs, whatever else, to your product and therefore to your consumers, and then the consumers are faced with the same challenges in the organizations where they work. So it's that vicious circle. So how do you deal with it without being part of the problem? And at least through my clients, we are, with regards to the inflation, we are kind of like really closely monitoring it. Honestly, we are so, we're just seeing as to what's happening, almost on daily basis. What are the other organizations doing? Constantly looking at some sort of surveys out there. Obviously, in all of my with all my clients, they are international global clients, so they do have hotspots where the inflation has gone through 60, 70, 80%. And of course, in those situations, you have to do something. But in a more developing markets, they're really staying close to the heartbeat to see what's happening. And while we listening, it's not really just sitting there and thinking, well, let's hear out what everybody else is doing and then we'll do. It's actually, all of my clients are putting the focus on benefits. And it's quite interesting because I remember when I first started in my reward life, every organization I went to, they said, oh, no, benefits are working. We need to focus on comp. And that's kind of flipped now. It's, comp is what it is, but we need to work on benefits. We need to make them more meaningful, more purposeful. We want to make sure that our employees, we help them through benefits. We minimize their outgoing by enhancing our benefits. And it's not about a one-off. I've seen some organization making kind of one-off allowances or one-off payments. But I don't think personally that it's a one-off thing. I don't think we can help our employees with making a one-off payment or a one-off allowance that may solve the issue that 1 month. It's more around thinking, what is there that we can put in through benefits that gives our employees longevity, that help is there month on month. So yes, so onerous now is, let's invest the money that we have, which is not enough to give everybody an inflationary increase, into benefits, and let's take that burden a little, as much as we can, from our employees with their daily outgoings.
I'll jump in here, and I think in terms of the benefits are a huge thing, especially in terms of how much further people's money can go. And Ben has really helped us here with effectively having a kind of discounts platform built in, pushing the communications to that, helping people's money go further, and also other benefits that that do that. Like, I think there's a lot of the kind of ancillary additional benefits to, for instance, health insurance and pension, all of this, and kind of you pushing those extra benefits from there can have a big impact without increasing your cost. And also on that, a lot of the providers are very aware of what's going on right now, and they're doing a lot more on kind of financial well-being and things like that. So kind of leveraging what you already have is a kind of quite low cost effective strategy here. And then on the impact of inflation, we know that it will impact certain people a lot more than others. The people at the low end of the pay scale, and decisions for companies eventually come down to priorities. And for instance, at Funding Circle, and I've seen other companies do it, our priority is our lowest paid staff, and that's why when they updated the real living wage, which is basically the minimum you need for a basic cost of living, and that's higher than the minimum wage. We made sure that no individuals were below that. It only impacted 30 people, but I think it's a signal to the rest of the company that our priority is making sure people can kind of weather the storm, rather than kind of treating everyone the same, which I think you can't do with a kind of finite resources.
Yeah.
I mean, like, sorry,
ahead, Paul.
David, if I could just jump in there just to give my 2 cents on this. Mine's going to be like a +1 to both Bruce and Figen in terms of what they're saying. I mean, I think in some cases where we're looking at hyperinflationary, countries and circumstances, I think it's very hard to get away with not addressing that in a manner which is increasing salaries for employees, either through that way or through having these one-off sort of payments. Like Figen, I don't think it's necessarily the right approach for areas that are not suffering this sort of hyperinflation. The question then becomes, what is hyperinflation? And really every organization can define that for themselves. I think a lot of this is sort of relative to the industry that you're in, your employee population, where your pay policy is, right? Which is the other point that I wanted to bring up, which is don't come off your pay policy as it is right now, just to directly address something that is hopefully, knock on wood, temporary in nature in terms of this 40-year sort of spike in inflation, right? It's really important at this time to state, if you really believe in your pay policy, to stick to your market point, stick to the direction that you were going in, previously, before all of this. And look to bolster employee packages in other ways that are going to deliver value to them, i.e. through benefits or through revised equity programs, through coaching, these sort of areas.
Yeah, I think it's because it's really interesting. As I've been speaking through work professionals as well, most companies are like, "Hey, we don't do inflationary increases," right? That's not like the policy, which is why this is an interesting topic. But that's in a usual year, right? 2%, 3%, not in one where it's at 10%. And then the other piece of that is you have a lot of employees being like, "Okay, well, I expect it," right? It's like, "Okay, this is obviously you're going to do something, right, company? When are you going to do it?" And so there is part of it is a communications challenge. Part of it, Paul, I guess, as you're saying, is don't deviate from what your policy is, but like in this case, should you, right? Like, should companies just increase the salaries to meet the inflationary pressure? And I guess what you guys are saying is it really depends on the market context. Any other perspective on that before we move on like how would you deal with these inflationary increases?
I think something that's interesting that we've seen is there's been the companies that have already announced that they've done something on this. There's been two approaches: one-off payments or cost of living payments that we've seen, or they've done kind of mid-year salary reviews. And I think it's interesting, there's pros and cons of each. If inflation is temporary, the one-off allowance is probably better for the company, because you can take away a one-off payment. If it's permanent, this inflation, then or if it is temporary and you increase everyone's salaries, when it falls back next year, you have a higher cost base. So there's issues there. However, I mean, as an individual, I'd prefer the salary increase. So I'd be interested to see what Figen and Paul think of that.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what we've seen a lot in the market when people are publicizing what they're doing. It's those two approaches.
Yes. Sorry, Paul.
Go ahead. No,
Thanks.
go ahead, Figen.
That's exactly what I've seen. It's one-off payments that the companies have been kind of publicizing to say, hey, we're helping our employees with, €1,000 or £1,000, cost of living not an adjustment, an allowance, which I think I would, if I had to choose between increasing the salaries or giving a one-off allowance, I'll probably use one-off allowance with a view that, okay, let's review the situation every 3 or 6 months, and then if necessary, we can do another allowance, another shot and another shot, until the economy actually, flattens out.
And why is that, Figen? Why would you prefer the allowance? What's the thought process?
Because your payroll cost and all the subsequent cost of that will stay static. And as Bruce said, what do you do if you increase everybody's salaries by 10% and the economy goes back down to normal? You can't go back to your employees and say, hey, by the way, it's now 3, I paid you 10, can I have the 7 back? It's quite difficult, right? You have to face that cost for the however many years, and you can't turn around and say no more pay increases for 6 years to come. So it's quite a difficult situation. So if I had to use one of the two, I'd probably use the allowance, because it doesn't have a huge impact on the rest of the cost. But again, I would really push to see what is there more that we can do just giving those allowances. As I said, they can pay for a shopping basket, or they can pay for a rent for 1 month, but what about the other 11? So if we can creatively, give benefits, and I think a lot of conversations that I've had with employees, it's around the financial planning. If I could just have someone to sit down with me and tell me how I could manage my income a little bit better, that would be really helpful, because I don't know who to ask, right? So it's financial planning, discounts like your platform provides, every penny counts. So it's really I say I would use the allowance as the last resort. I would kind of just push into where can we put our effort more, that we can give a more kind of holistic help, rather than here's some cash,
Yeah.
that's solved the problem for a month, off you go for the rest of the 11.
So I subscribe to that completely in terms of having it as a last ditch sort of like resort in terms of an allowance. Between the two, in terms of salary increase and having one-offs, yeah, I would definitely choose the one-offs. I think the salary increases should be strictly well, it depends on your pay policy again, your philosophy, but strictly market driven, essentially. If you want to do something and you're forced into doing something around inflationary, then one off is the way to go. I'm always worried about expectations and this sort of becoming part of if this, especially if this is ongoing, if you start doing these like quarterly basis or semi-annually, the
Yeah.
expectation starts to become that it's actually just part
Yeah.
of your
pay.
base salary anyway. And so why don't you just like roll this in? Again, last ditch resort. What I would really look to do is look at any sort of pre-tax benefits that you can bolster, that you can, as a company, contribute to. Potentially take whatever is left within your total rewards budget, or salary increase budget, promotional budget, whatever it is. And in some cases, it is about scrounging around to find where those zeros are hiding, and look to bolster those pre-tax sort of benefit areas, because that still delivers value to employees, albeit not in a sort of straight line monetary way. There is impact that employees will feel from that, and it's lasting. So it's not something that's sort of like a one-off thing. There's all kinds of studies around that. Once you give these, like you give one-off sort of allowances, for example, the effect is immediate for sure. But a week afterwards, it's like,
Where's my next one?
what have you done for me lately, right? Whereas at least this is something that has a bit more staying power around these pre-tax benefits.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and we do see a lot of the. I mean, I think in the news even recently, right? Like Monzo, and there's probably at least in the UK like 20 or 30 big names who are doing all these the cost of living adjustments, and I guess thinking about it differently as well. I think Bruce, you made the point, right, in terms of, hey, let's do it for the people who really need it, and then for the other folks, we'll do it later on, right? But let's step in when we know that people are suffering, for the lower paid folks, which is something
Yeah,
that we see. Yeah.
and I think that goes to the whole part of like pay philosophy. I mean, part of our pay philosophy is effectively giving people enough to make do on, and that would only impact those at the very kind of bottom end of the pay scale. And a lot of these companies, who I've got it in front of me, who have done either one-off or salary increases, it is usually the lower paid. Santander did it for employees under 35,000. Nationwide did it which is a bank, by up to a certain grade within the organisation. Aberdeen Investment Management, only people under £75,000. So I think a lot of these may not be telling you, oh, we're only doing this for a certain group of employees, but I would assume most of them are picking the people who really need it, and it's not going to be the kind of management level that are getting these cost of living payments. I'm sure they will probably have to suck it up, and maybe their increases in the next year may be lower to offset that if there's budgets to hit. But yeah, I think that's a key thing here. We're trying to support people with a finite amount of money, and just on the kind of, I think the financial well-being is a huge one, and that's probably the biggest way that you can make people's money go further. We've introduced Octopus Money Coach, a funny funding circle, and it gives everyone a free session with a money coach, and then they can choose to effectively salary sacrifice, so out of their pre-tax pay for advice. And effectively it's not that expensive when you take out the tax, and also the company saves on the national insurance contributions that we can then reinvest in other things as well. So there's ways you can be intelligent about this and give people more value than just giving them a one-off payment.
And helping them to manage the financial situation, right? So,
Yeah.
Paul, it sounds like you had something to say there as well.
Yeah, again, another plus one to that in terms of the financial literacy. I find in my experience anyways, employees, I'm always surprised actually at how many employees actually live paycheck to paycheck essentially. And so this whole sort of like financial literacy, financial planning, and sort of any benefits or consultation that you can provide. And Bruce is mentioning Octopus, which is a great one, for example, that gives employees sort of the tools that they need and building up a skill set to actually manage their finances in a more meaningful way that sort of directly address the pressure that we're all feeling currently. I always find that really helps as well. Also, like in terms of like your platform, for example, David, like having these wallets that are there sitting on these platforms that you could potentially proportion differently, for example. So if there are sort of wallets or cards that are sitting there with a pool of money that's sitting there that was essentially meant for learning and development, for example, potentially you could proportion that out to utility companies, and you could just load that up onto a platform like yourself, like Thanks Ben, sorry. And then you can move those funds over to that area, and employees can directly sort of pay for their water bills, their gas bills, etc., through these wallets. This is just like from Bruce's point, which is trying to find out where this money is and trying to siphon it in a way that is going to be most valuable to employees.
Yeah, I think, and Bruce, and I'll let you respond as well, which is like in the sense that it goes back to the budgeting point, right? Of like, hey, you have the budget at least this year, right? For certain of these things, how do you use it, right? And we do see companies doing it in that sense of like, hey, we already have this line item, but we're going to use it differently, right? Because at least it was there, it was going to be spent, but now we're going to maybe reallocate it, as opposed to what we see as hard is going back to management and being like, hey, we need a new budget when the companies are suffering as well, right? It's like okay, but we're not increasing our prices by 10%, right? Yeah, any perspective on that? How do
Yeah,
you do with the budgeting?
I mean, two examples of exactly what Paul was saying. With our well-being allowance, when we first introduced it, we spoke about, I don't know, buying a pair of running trainers, going to the gym. Whereas what we've done now is effectively widen the definition of well-being, because it covers so many things that if, for instance, your mental well-being is being damaged by the cost of living, well, it's going to be good for your well-being to use that allowance for your energy bills or whatever it would be. And we're also allowing people on the learning and development budget, you can use that for financial education as well, so it's not just necessarily to do with the job. And that's ways you can kind of recycle money that you've already got, basically, to get a bit more bang for your buck. And then another thing that we've been doing more recently is one of the hardest things in reward and benefits is always communicating benefits. You can have a great package, and then people come up to you and say, "Oh, do we do anything around this?" And yeah, it's like we've been doing that for years, and they just don't know. So what we've been doing recently is trying to spotlight benefits in our global gatherings and or local gatherings by having real world experiences, stories. So we got someone from our IT team to talk about how they've used a certain benefit, and then someone from the finance team for another benefit. And as soon as people see their colleagues using these and getting benefit, I think that's how you drive people towards these benefits. And for instance, in our sales team, as soon as one or two of them do something, the rest of them all do it as well. So you do get this herd mentality, and I think kind of pushing those stories is a great way. And there'll always be a few people who get huge value from the benefits, because that's just the sort of people they are, and using them as examples is a great way to like push everything without any extra cost.
I just want to you made me think, Bruce, when you said a couple of words in there, and one word that came to my mind as you were talking is kind of recycle. And it's one of the benefits that we provide, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call provide it. It's EAP. So I hear a lot from my clients right now is, oh, I think we need an EAP, or we talk about financial well-being. Oh yeah, we do have EAP. It's kind of the organizations pay for this benefit. They post it on their doors of the toilets, and kind of like no one knows what is it there for. I think they only think it's, if I'm having a mental health issue, I'll pick up the phone. But actually, more than that, we've just gone through implementing EAP for one of my clients, and just sitting there and talking about all of this knowledge, all of this help that's available through picking up a phone and just saying, I need some help with financial planning, and tapping into, 5, 6 sessions are more than sufficient for someone to show you actually how you should budget on a monthly basis. Uh, you know, Financial, mental coaching. There's apps upon apps, podcasts upon podcasts. There's lots of, it's like this little Solomon's cave of all sorts of beautiful gifts that we've kind of closed off and put it there, put the big boulder, close it off, and never use it again. But as it's resurfacing, and as we're talking more and more about it, I think it's Ruth, to your point, kind of dig around a little bit what's out there and keep communicating to your employees, because that's really important. How do you keep communicating this is available to you? And from EAP perspective, it's incredibly confidential, so no one will ever find out what you talk, on one-to-one basis. So definitely a very, very undersold, underused benefit that I would prefer that everybody has it in an organization, and recommend, if you don't have it, is incredibly cost effective and not very expensive to implement.
Yeah. Just to raise one thing, Lewis Tasker on the chat asked a really good question on why have a well-being budget when you could just add it to base pay, as it's taxable anyway. I think that's a really good question, and there's a few things for that. One, it means that there's always going to be a focus on well-being, even when people are kind of struggling, and make sure that individuals, even in a downturn, do focus on that. And I think psychologically, people see that as a additive, whereas if you gave it onto their base pay and spread it over 12 months, they just wouldn't notice it. So that I think there is a kind of mental gymnastics with it that is actually beneficial for the employer to do, rather than just putting it on their base salary.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of what we do in Total Rewards is psychological, right? And if you're hiding some of these things and not calling attention to it, then it's just lost, right? Like it's completely lost. And maybe 10 years down the road, you're reintroducing the same sort of benefit that you rolled into salary 10 years ago, right? So it's in my experience, it's always nice to sort of keep these things separate and just communicate them, right, and get them pushed out there in employees. Sort of sphere of attention. Essentially, we're all sort of strapped for attention these days, but try to call it that out as much as possible. On the EAP point, I think just to follow on what Figen is saying there, these are wonderful things to have, and they're really useful in times of crisis, right? Otherwise, it's very quiet, and people don't tend to sort of like focus on EAP type sort of like programs. But also with these types of programs, you can also add like family members to these programs as well, right? So this is another way where you can actually stretch the funds that you have internally within the organization to add family members to an EAP program, so that it's not just the employee getting the benefit, but you would also get, spouses, daughters, sons, all these things sort of like involved, because we're all sort of like feeling the pinch, and if the employee is sort of like feeling this and coming home, then there is sort of a knock-on effect on that as well. So it's a great opportunity to do that too.
Yeah, I would say a couple things that we see as well. So EAP, because we get a lot of data on how people are using it, right? So like it tends to have pretty low engagement, and then it has spikes, right? So we actually see them in some cases in some companies who have been through a period of a RIF or a layoff or so. We do see a spike of people using it, right, in terms of people engaging with it, or as you say, in these kinds of crises. The other thing with EAPs and things like that is a lot of other benefits will bundle it in. So sometimes you don't even have to pay for it separately, right? Because of this, the providers do recognize that it is a low engagement, low cost thing, but so life insurance or things like that will have it in some cases. And I think when it comes to that topic of like getting more from your budget, a lot of this is, at least on the benefit side, has to do with the scheme design, right? Of like understanding, hey, are we double paying for things that we have as a result of having it as a part of a package or something else? Employee discounts is another common one. Sometimes people will pay for different employee discount scheme when it's already bundled into an EAP or another kind of benefit, right? And so doing that work of figuring out, okay, and then getting people to understand what is included as part of that, because a lot of times people don't know that you could get financial advice from an EAP either, right? Or even a pension advisor or on that side would come in. So those are just some of the things to watch out for. And yeah, I think the framing as you guys are going is super important in terms of what it's supposed to be for. I also want to call out, I think Luke in the chat mentioned, right? In theory, when it comes to things like allowances, it is easier, as you guys were saying, right, when it came to the cost of living things, to adjust it over time. So I think it's much harder to decrease pay or once once you've done an increase or provided it as a part of the pay, like try taking that back, right? I mean, I'm sure none of you guys have done that, right? Because it would just, I don't think it's going to go down too well. Within that kind of frame, one thing that I wanted to talk about is, and we've kind of been going in that direction anyways, but with inflation, the downturn, and things like that, what are some of the other things that you guys are thinking about potentially implementing, or how do you get more? What are some levers that you can pull, right? Outside of, we already talked about EAP, financial coaching, other things that you guys would think about?
I think equity is an interesting
Yeah.
one here. It's I mean, it seems like a lot of us are in tech, so I assume that our share price is down. So effectively, to give the same value, you could either give more equity, or it's cheaper to give equity. That's something. I think it's a tough one, because what I'm seeing is that people are valuing equity even less than they would, because it's not certain. So I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword there, where yes, it's cheaper, but people may value it less as well. And one of the things you can do there is to give people a bit more certainty, move away from options with an exercise price to restricted stock units, so that individuals know at least they're getting X shares or in the future, rather than it might be a very kind of leveraged value. So that's something else people can do. And I think companies are targeting that at more so than they have in the past. Previously, I think there was it was mostly like a bit more of a broad approach, whereas I think that companies are targeting it on those who are kind of very key to keep. Again, finite resources, and all.
Yeah, what I've seen is increased eligibility for equity. I've seen the instruments being swapped out, so less options, more RSUs that will have some kind of face value to them, and then revised vesting conditions as well, where possible. Also, that goes for the holding conditions as well. But if you're able to sort of pull these levers around equity, it does help, even though it is a bit sort of equity is still like the potential, and it's always like you selling on that potential. But there is value to be had there if you package it up properly and make it appealing to employees. I think one of the other things that I've been seeing, David, is companies looking at leave programs, for example, and looking to either bolster their leaves, or increasing the amount, either the amount of time that employees can be out, or the sort of paid portion out of that as well, at 100% or whatever the percentage would be. That would be an additional to sort of whatever the statutory requirements would be, plus whatever your company policy was at that particular time. So this goes for mat leave, pat leave, adoption leave, those types of things. But I've also seen a higher prevalence of sabbatical leaves as well, or sort of like time off type of leaves. To give employees a bit of a break, essentially. I mean, burnout is real. These are very stressful times. We've just come out of 2 years of just like nonstop sort of stress. We're still going through this sort of like stretching and scrambling period as well. And I've seen quite a bit of uptake on employees wanting to take like a month, 2 months sort of like stretch. And with those types of leaves, it would be unpaid, where you can do that, where it's legally possible to actually do that. But these are the types of programs that you could potentially put in as well, which again are valuable to employees depending on where they are mentally or where they are within their particular life circumstance. That I think employees will appreciate down the road, right? Sort of these types of programs that again don't necessarily hit them in the pocketbook, but make a difference on their day-to-day life.
And I think I would add to the leave that there's leave policies are also an indicator of what the company cares about, and we've done a few things where we've introduced kind of enhanced bereavement leave, enhanced miscarriage leave, and also care leave. So if you have children and they're sick, rather than having to take a half day or full day of holiday, actually having paid leave for that. And these are things that you hope never get used, and actually in practice very, very rarely get used. But the value of announcing that to your employees, it communicates that the company cares about its employees, and they will think twice when they're potentially looking at another role, when it's like, well, actually, I know, for instance, Funding Circle will look after them, will look after me when times are tough. And these things, especially post COVID, the extreme cases, knowing that they're looked after in those cases can be really valuable. And from a kind of a cutthroat perspective, they're very low cost to do as well.
Yeah.
Menopause and retirement support. Paulina Davies has just said, exactly that sort of stuff. Not massive use, but really helpful.
Yeah, I think it does go back to just watching the time here as well. I want to make sure that we get to some of the questions that are in there. So one of the things that I think are related to that is just thinking about, which I had as a topic to discuss anyway, is the communications aspect, right? Of like, hey, what do you shout about? How do you communicate it? What are you guys doing or saying? Because obviously employees are, in some cases, worried as well, right? Some are worried for their own financial security. So maybe we start with that. Just generally, how are you thinking about communicating it? And then we can pick up, I think there are a number of different ones here around, how do you get more value or communicating the EAP, for example, and shouting about it, communicating about your benefits. But maybe before we go into that, just generally, how are you guys dealing with this, right, over the next couple of months?
I think I was just casting my mind in the olden days when we were all in the office. Communicating benefits was so easy because you'll have a benefits fair and everybody would come down and it would be like speed dating, finding out about benefits. But in today's world, when we work remotely, and we not only work remotely within a distance from the office, but we actually work nationally, spread out everywhere and spread out internationally. How do you keep that message going? So it makes it a bit more challenging again, and brings that creativity into our minds, and opens up new new levels of how do you approach this. What I have seen with some of my clients is they tend to dedicate part of the internal comms team to the HR. So whatever initiative is taking place in the HR and it's really a hot topic, or it's a new benefit, or whatever it is that we want to push the message out, working with that internal comms, and putting that message out, be it through webinars, be it through marketing material that we can post in certain channels or parts of intranet, or even virtual desk dropping. So it's picking a topic, and not inundating the employee base on various things all the time, because it's oh yes, it's interesting, but I haven't got time, I'll get to it. So picking a topic on maybe a monthly or bi-weekly basis and really pushing that out. And I think that's the way it's been worked. Even if I cast my mind into two maybe years ago, the way it worked the best is actually partnering with the internal comms and packaging that message rather than sending an email and say, here's the link, just making it a virtual fair, I guess, trying to communicate as a virtual fair. What I just wanted to add one more thing before I forget about it, and I might go a couple of steps back. Make it purposeful. Make everything that you do in reward purposeful. If it's base pay, the purpose of the base pay is to pay for the role that you do. If it's medical, it's because we care about your health and we don't want you to worry about it. So make it purposeful. If it's a well-being allowance, we don't bolt it onto the pay, because the purpose of the well-being allowance is to look after you. The pay pays for the job you do. So make everything that you do around benefits really purposeful. Why do you do it? What is the purpose of it? And then I saw somewhere that says packaging. Package it within that purpose.
Yeah, and just on the other comms things, we, especially if you're potentially a small rewards team, it's leveraging the rest of your HR or people team to push these things. So there's training people partners and also training line managers on what sorts of support that companies have. And then our L&D team, every month there's a different theme, and occasionally it's on well-being, but sometimes it's on like development. But if there's a mental well-being month, kind of scheduling some of your providers to come in and they usually do free sessions on this stuff. So one month you're specifically targeting mental well-being. We also, at the beginning of each benefit cycle, we have a financial well-being month, which is when we bring in the pension provider. So having a kind of calendar of things and targeting a specific element of the rewards package, I think is quite useful. And as well as if there's anything you already do that has high engagement, so if that's and I'm stealing some answers from Paulina Davis in the chat here, if there's a newsletter, or you do kind of global or local meetings on a regular basis, try and get an HR spotlight or a benefits spotlight in that, and people are already there. You've already got your captive audience, and it's a great way to push these things, especially when governments make announcements. Say a government makes an announcement to tax rates, maybe you could then talk about the impact on people, how they can maybe use their pension more, or other pre-tax salaries. All of these sort of things you can use as triggers to get people more aware of what you already do.
Paul, yeah, not to call you out, because I know you didn't want it to be called out on the communications side of things, but also I remember a conversation we had maybe 3 or 4 years ago, right, where you were also talking about, hey, benefits and things. They're products ultimately, right? And how do you market it to each individual employee, and how do you think about doing the effective campaigns around these types of things? Because ultimately, it is kind of like marketing to employees, right? So I guess, yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll be very, very quick, right? I mean, like, I completely agree that benefits, and I would extend that to total rewards, actually,
Yeah.
are products essentially that you need to spotlight to employees so that they can engage in these products, right? And then you need a call to action. So whatever you want to sort of like package that up, or how you want to deliver that, whether that's like lunch and learns, whether that is like through a calendar or events, like whatever it is, just get out there and market it as much as you can, so employees understand the value that's being delivered, and more importantly, they understand how this is actually being put together, right? That's always been my philosophy, and I think that I think now it's super more important than ever to actually get out there, to get these messages out there.
Yeah, I think just seeing Jeffrey's comment there and question as well around the transparency, right? And especially now, as again, I think a lot of people are wondering, hey, like, what is going to happen? Are you guys thinking about doing proactive things around this, or like, yeah, how are you guys thinking about the transparency point as well? It's always a hot topic, right? Isn't like, should people know everybody else's pay and things like that? But how are you guys thinking about it?
I could jump on that one if that's okay, guys. I at Molly, we are definitely pushing on the transparency sort of angle. We do have a works council internally within Molly, and so once I joined earlier this year, we put in once a month where I go to the Works Council and I present things around our benefits programs, our total rewards programs, our salary structures, what's our pay philosophy, etc., in order to make it more transparent to them, which has a trickle down effect, obviously, to employees. There is more sort of to come around that, but I find that it's super useful in them having this information and being armed with this information, and it tends to sort of take the pressure out of the tire a little bit as well when you're having discussions with employees or a works council if you have one. I also sneakily think that it's super important to get in front of stakeholders like this to get the message across that no one planned for the events that we're in right now. The macroeconomics are definitely affecting the microeconomics here, and everyone is trying to sort of do the best they can right now. Budgets were not built for double-digit inflation for this year, and so I think part of that has to be part of the message out there as well.
I think at this time, kind of up-to-date data is going to be a big thing, and I think a lot of the kind of benchmarking and survey providers will be moving towards this. Now, at times like this, it's actually very hard to make informed decisions when your data could be a year out of date. So, kind of, I think the large consultancy company that will come up with kind of quarterly or even live benchmarking data will be a big one, a big winner for them, because it is really hard. Typically, you say, well, I know that the benchmark was X in March and salary inflation is 3%, so it's X plus 3% now. I think that's a lot harder now, and it is harder to make those decisions. I do think that kind of what you would call as aging data is important. So kind of looking at what salary inflation is until the current time and applying that to old benchmarking data, so that you're at least kind of within the ballpark rather than working on old data.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we see the same in benefits, actually, in terms of companies are doing things now. And if you're working off of benchmarks that are a year old or 6 months old, like what was happening 6 months ago is very different than what's happening now, right? So what companies did then obviously aren't as applicable now. And so, yeah, definitely true, I think, on the live salary data side of things as well. I guess just watching our time, I wanted to go back to a couple of one other question to lean on the experience that we have in the room as well. So Gabby Rudolph, right, asked a number of questions around managing a reward during a previous recession, and like if there were any main learnings, right? Like it's not the first time I think that a lot of folks are dealing with these. Maybe in some cases, yeah, unprecedented in the last 10 years or so, but obviously we had the financial crisis in 08 and things like that. Any lessons or learnings from that period that you guys can share?
I mean, I'd say she also asked the difference. The big difference is then unemployment increased. So effectively, the supply of labour increased, and therefore there weren't as many page changes required. So I would say it was easier, and but I mean, I was just leaving university at the time, so I'll let someone else kind of answer what they did at the time.
Figen, shall I go or should you go?
Yeah, I don't mind. I was in a pretty stable organization, so you go, Paul, and I'll give my 2 pennies at the end.
Right. I think the short answer to this, Gabby, is there is no comparison. Right. The 2008 crisis felt different. It looked different, and I think the origination of that crisis was very different as well. What happened during the 2008 sort of crisis in terms of what companies did essentially was mass layoffs, right? Which is completely different to where we are right now, at least in my perspective, within my particular industry in fintech, for example. The two are not comparable from my perspective. But we can take learnings from that. Number one is that this stuff passes. Like it sort of hits, it feels very real, and it is real in terms of your pocketbook, but it does, it sort of goes through a process, and then things pick up, right? So what's important from my perspective in terms of learning is understanding what the market is doing and trying to gauge that as quickly as possible so that we're ready to turn on a dime and act when you start tipping over into like what the next phase is going to be. So that goes back to Bruce's comment around like benchmarking data and trying to get reports as much as possible. I think I filled out like 3 inflation reports in the last like 24 hours. It's just like pinging off in my inbox right now. So I'm filling those out because I want to know in 3 months, 6 months, what is coming essentially, and be prepared.
Figen, yeah, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I
Before-
absolutely agree. I think at the time I was with as I said, with an incredibly stable organization that was service oil and gas industry, so money was never short. Tenure of the employees were kind of it was their first job, and they would probably retire in the same organization. So it was completely a different kettle of fish, I think, to where the organizations are now. It was, if we take it to the beginning of the conversation, it was the employer-driven market rather than employee-driven market. So
Yeah.
I agree with Bruce and with Paul that in context it's completely different, environment, different, it was a different decade, by all means. So it will be very difficult to transfer any knowledge from there to what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, and I think the push to ESG and the kind of cultural context is very different in that companies now, when they do layoffs, that it's seen very negatively. So I think trying to kind of weather the storm and not kind of sticking your neck above the parapet will be seen as a benefit, versus the companies that do layoffs will find it harder to recruit in the future, whereas previously companies were far more willing to do layoffs and then just recruit back when things turned around. I think that has changed slightly, and the view of companies that do that, as you see in the news, is a lot more negative than it used to be.
Yeah, before kind of as we close things off as well, right? So I think as you guys were mentioning, it is a pretty interesting time in the sense that you have pressure both from the talent point of view, as in like as you guys, I think Figen made the point when you were first, like the challenge. You didn't start with the challenge of the recession and the inflation and things, even though that is a challenge. I think the majority of people, the reward leaders, are still about how can we recruit, attract, and retain the best people, right? And that's still the number one thing. But obviously now we have this backdrop of, okay, if budgets aren't increasing, if the company isn't doing as good as it was kind of previously, like where do I get this from, right? So it really is interesting times with these two kind of tensions at each other. So I think we're already over time. So this was super fun conversations. I first want to thank again Bruce and Paul for joining me. I think we could have gone for another hour or so on these topics. So really fun to have you guys. If you want to find out more information about them or get in touch with all the details are in the LinkedIn event. So feel free to connect with folks there. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you for the next one. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Thanks again.